There we go. So welcome to Unit 5, Hand Balancing. Jesus Christ, we're here. It's been, 3 months now since we started OMU, so this will be definite fun. John, if you could go ahead and I will spotlight you. Here we go.
All right, so unlike most of the other webinars we've done, where we screen share videos of specific exercises, today Mikael is going to do the exercises with me in my apartment. I may ask him to take off his clothes while he's doing it, as is the OMU tradition. But yeah, we're just going to go back and forth in kind of an interview form. And if you guys have any questions, please feel free to write those down in the chat. So we're going to work on this for 3 weeks, handstands. And the first week is going to be kind of an introduction to Mikael's history, some of the exercises that you promote for both beginners and intermediate and perhaps even for advanced athletes or practitioners. And we're going to talk a bit about your philosophy and your training style. On the second and the third webinar, we'll devote a bit more time to the people who already are practicing handstands. So if you have any specific questions about progressions towards skills or maybe some of your own limitations or experiences that you'd like to get a second opinion on, please save those for webinar number 2 and webinar number 3. For now, Mikael, if you would be so kind, can't you tell us a bit about yourself? Like, what's your background? How did you get into handstands?
So, a little bit about my background. Well, as a kid, I was not an athlete at all. So I basically got into any kind of physical training at 14 when I started karate. I had a lot of back pain, and then my physiotherapist told me that karate is good for your posture. So I decided to try it out, and that's sort of when I started to move my body a little bit. Before that, I was kind of overweight and had back pain was sort of like a recurrent issue in my life. And then it's like 18, 19, I started breakdancing. I saw VHS Freestyle Session 3, and I was just completely captivated. I had to do that thing. And it kind of came with that. For some reason, I just figured it was a good idea to try to stand on my hands as a warm-up. So I just do that all the time. And as I got deeper into breaking over the years, I was doing a lot of handstand-related moves. And then after a bunch of years of breaking, I ran into a hand balancer from the United States called Corey Tabino. He's from New York. And that was super cold winter in Oslo. He was performing in a tent down at Aker Brygge, and I went into the class with him, and I really fell in love with this stuff. And I saw that I was learning it really fast, because I would train with him then for a couple of months, and I would be able to progress very rapidly due to breakdancing, which is something I'll be speaking more about later. But from there, I applied to circus school. I got into the circus school called DOC in Stockholm, where I did 3 years under a teacher called Alexander Gavrilov, who everyone calls him Sasha, old guy who taught me the Russian style of upside down.
Cool. So when you were breakdancing, you were also practicing handstands.
Yeah, I guess. But the interesting thing with breakers is that like everyone can handstand, but like the form is irrelevant in breaking, because breaking is not so much like, in general, what sort of characterizes breaking as an athletic discipline, from how I see it, is that in breaking you're not taking your body and adapting it to a certain criteria, to certain skills like in gymnastics. You just take those skills and you adapt them to your body, and that's why you end up with this enormous amount of variation onto it. And of course, this goes into dance style with finding your own flavor and all of that stuff to it. So all breakers can handstand, but it's very often like bent arms and all of this stuff, which in breaking is very efficient. It's very useful. If I do breaking, I still do handstand like this, and I'll be a bit more in front than if I want to do one arm, because that's what works within sort of that framework. But yeah, it's quite different when you sort of enter into that sort of more structured circus style.
So how do you think that your breaking background influence your handstand training? Like, was it beneficial for you? Did you feel like it gave you kind of a...
And this is where I think that my sort of entrance point into this differs a little bit from many others who went at least to my level of hand balancing and stuff, is that like I had no technique. I just went on my hands and I tried to stand on one arm because I saw a guy do it in a performance once, in like a breaking performance, and I just kept trying. And I was learning the hand hops when you jump on one hand, and sort of the air baby, which is like classic breaking moves. So I had a lot of experience on my hands, and I had an enormous amount of experience on one hand, like balancing and controlling my body from one point. And that was very non-specific how you did it. But when I started with my coach, and I remember he told me later, he was like, yeah, you came in there and I thought just another random breaker. Okay, let's see. But after 2 months, I just went on the floor and I just went over to one arm and I just let go and asked him, is it like this? And he's like, yeah, that's solid. And I think that came because over years, I never tried to actually do it specifically in that sense, but I had the sensation, I had the feeling of the balance. So when I learned to push my shoulder to sort of a more efficient place and actually work with my body structure instead of just waving around like you do in sort of the breakdance style balancing, it came very fast because the sensation was there.
Do you see any of the, like, do you see any similarities between your experience as a breakdancer going into handstand, like for other students that have practiced some other type of movement art before they've gone into handstand training?
Definitely. Interesting. One of my first, actually the first guy that I started teaching online, he was a tricker from Croatia, and it was very interesting to teach him because, I mean, he can do all kinds of flips. He's been doing tricking for many years. So he's just like, his orientation in space was great. He wasn't particularly strong or fit or anything. Decent shape, young guy, like 20 maybe, but it was very quick for him to pick this up because he had orientation in space. When I told him, okay, you need to move your legs in this direction and need to push your shoulder like that, he was able to take it faster than someone who's just like massively strong and sort of flexible and all these things, but is not able to sense where their body is. So I think that having experience in those kind of proprioceptive disciplines is definitely a big help.
Yeah, that's been something that you've talked about, like that often when you are being taught handstands from, let's say, a more gymnastic perspective, that you need to go through a very, very specific list of progressions. But it seems like from your experience and your background and from what you've seen, that it's not necessarily that linear. We're going to go back to that. But before we talk a bit more about like how to do a handstand, why, like you told me, you found it interesting once you started practicing with this American guy. Why do you practice handstands? What do you like about it?
I think it's kind of this thing that it seems with handstands, like there's a funny analogy if you compare a backflip to a handstand. A backflip is really, really hard to try and very easy to master. And a handstand is the complete opposite. It's really easy to try, but very hard to master. So that anyone can kind of try to put their hands on the floor and kick up just a little bit on the grass or on the mat or something. So it's not that scary. It's very accessible to try. But then you experience that, damn, this is quite hard to actually stay up there. This is quite hard. And then suddenly someone asks you to do this and that with your legs and keep control and stay up for a long time. You just experience that there is such a variation. And what I think I find the most fascinating is that if you look at someone doing, let's say you take like some of the most complex one-arm handstands there are, like, and you compare two of them, where one is just with you having your legs a little bit open and one where you close your legs, the aesthetical and visual effect of it is very similar, but the experience of doing it is drastically different. And I think that's what people experience early on in the process, and that's what I still experience. It's just, okay, I move a little bit more to there. Wow, it's totally different. It feels like a massive world, sort of, in just like you move your leg from there to there. So there's nothing more, but in here it's just massive, sort of.
Yeah, that's kind of like a recurring theme in your life as well. You enjoy the nitpicking and the incredibly annoying, monotonous work of something and the details. Like, one thing that not necessarily everyone knows is that you are also an origami artist.
progress.
If we could call it that.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, it's very much the same thing. You sit there and fold and fold and fold and fold and fold and fold and fold, and it just seems like there's no progress. And it's just you have like I use the analogy with handstands. It's like picking on an iceberg with a needle. It's like moves along, but you have to be there every day and pick, and you don't see any progress until like months and months down the lane. So, and I think that's one of the things that it sort of still gets me interested in it. And what is kind of fascinating, but also with handstands, is the fact that like it's problem solving, all the time. Whenever you're giving yourself a slightly different task, suddenly you have to go back to step one. If I'm going to do just a combination of my regular routine work, but I, for example, change the direction of it, change the speed, or have a different entry, I will have to sort of go back to that sort of concentration thing. I can't go autopilot anymore.
Yeah.
And there is always this sort of new, that it's always kind of fresh meat. And that's also why I think kind of obsessive people like myself get very attracted to it, because you have to solve this problem every single day. So yeah,
it's a good for obsession.
Definitely.
But like, if you were to try to convince someone to start practicing handstand, because like you'll find so many people out, like especially online, that say that you have to practice handstand because it's good for this, it's good for this, it's good for this, it's good for your shoulders, it's good for your wrists, it's good for your balance. What would you say if you were going to try to convince someone into starting hand balancing? What would that individual get out from the process?
You learn to stand on your hands. Maybe you get a higher tolerance for frustration. There isn't really much more to it. Like, in one sense, like, yes, you might get more and more body control in general, but it's a very specific thing. It's like you're committing to doing a certain thing that you need an enormous amount of time to actually get any even decent level of mastery to. And I don't really subscribe to this idea that you have to do anything. It's just if you're interested in doing handstands, then you should. But if you're not interested, it doesn't matter. And this is something I find very fascinating coming from the circus tradition, because that's exactly what people do there. People come to me and say, "Oh, can you juggle?" They ask me. I'm like, "Yeah, no, I can't." And they're like, "Yeah, but can you juggle 3 balls?" "Sure, I can do a bunch of tricks with 3 balls." But for me, that's not being able to juggle, because the people that juggle in circus, if you think you're spending time on training, you're not compared to these guys. It's like they can stay, like, because you don't get tired from it physically, they can literally spend 10 hours a day only doing that. And these guys are really obsessive. It's amazing. But the fact that like it's in that field, it's people are basically just doing the things that they like. Everyone is like able to do quite many different things, because in all the hours you spend in the circus hall, I'm kind of tired of that. Oh, let's just mess around and try something else. So people have very high variety of skills, but they sort of associate and go very deeply into the things that they truly enjoy. And yeah, that's what I would say about handstands. There's just like it's a thing that you can really enjoy, and it's worth trying. Definitely, maybe you fall in love with it, but if you don't, why bother?
That's my kind of promotion. I like hearing that. So, how do you start practicing handstands? How do you do it?
Good question. Like for me, what I've been trying to do since I've been teaching quite a lot of handstands around for quite some years now, I've been teaching both on like low level beginner, can't, like I had people come to my workshops and be like, "Oh, I can't really hold the weight on my arms yet." Okay, fair enough. You can start there. And I also taught, like, I've been a full-time teacher at professional circus schools teaching hand balancers. So I've seen a large variety at this point. And what I've been trying to do, first of all, I mean, there's an enormous amount of people teaching nowadays handstands, and there is no one, like, there are very, very many ways to roam with this, and that is very important to remember. Like, the number one thing is that, like, is consistency. You can have trash technique, you can have trash, how to say, systematic, or like no system. If you just try enough, you will get more out of it than if you know exactly what to do and you just do it once a week. So like having high consistency on this type of practice is really important. But what I've been trying to do is basically, like I said, most of my technique comes from Alexander Gavrilov from the circus school in Stockholm. But I've been trying to sort of apart what he taught me and like be critical towards that. So what I finally felt that I've come to now after many years of this is that like I thought I've added something to what he gave me. I've taken away some things that I don't agree with, and I've tried to add something on my own. And the main sort of focus of my approach towards handstand is I've been trying to find the key principles that sort of always there, regardless of what level you're at. So let's say, to take an extreme example, when I teach people to kick up to a 2-arm handstand, I was teaching a class in Stockholm, and I was teaching them this kick up technique, and I suddenly hit me like, wow, I was trying to do perhaps the hardest kick up there is, where you kick straight onto one arm into like a legs together arm up position, which takes an enormous amount of precision to do. And I just thought, wow, why am I not using the same principle I'm teaching to these beginners on my own thing? Because what I was teaching the beginners was to cut away as many variables as possible so that the movement into the handstand would be have as little random factors as possible, and so that you would get a consistent type of thing into it. And lo and behold, it worked. Because I mean, it wasn't a complex procedure with my experience to apply it over, but it was taking some of these few core principles that I'm using that I see are present at the first time you try to get up to a handstand, that are still present when you're doing like all of sort of a very like super 10 years into the future difficult stuff.
Cool. So before we start talking a bit more in detail about like the exercises that you would encourage people to do, consistency is key. How do people maintain consistency?
Very good question. For me, and in general, like the way when I try to teach people, it's just like you maintain consistency by, like, I like to think about handstands in general. I mean, it does have a strength component, it has a mobility component, all these things, but I want it to be more practice based. In like, it's more like playing the guitar than just getting really strong. Because the funny thing, the better you get at handstands, it's not like getting better at lifting a barbell. When you get great at lifting 60, you'll add 65 and 70 and so on. When you're getting better at a handstand, you're actually, per definition, spending less energy doing the same thing you spent 6 months ago, even though you weigh the same. So what I try to do is to make it so that you're able to more sort of focus technically on the practice and not have these like, you must stay up 3 times 60 before you do this. You must have 5 times blah, 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 blah. Like, I always try to sort of round the edges of that, because if I'm going to give you a handstand program for your kick up to handstand, I'll rather tell you, okay, so per day, try to do between 10 and 30 kick ups to handstand. You have quite a large like variability between those two numbers, but being able to then you can go home and you can think, okay, I'm a bit sore today, I'm just going to do a few. You just did 5, but that's better than having done none. But if you would have done 25, maybe your wrists would have been too sore. So I'd like rather say that being able to sort of implement it into your daily life in a sensible way is the way to sort of maintain consistency with this. Because if you're just going ham and just banging out an enormous amount of time and attention on these things, you also end up being too tired to actually do what it is, and what it is precision work.
Because I mean, it's very interesting with handstands, because handstands have gained a very high level of acceptance within the fitness, the strength, and the conditioning community. And it seems like whenever we try to take something into fitness, into strength and conditioning, it gets way more structured and systemized than what it is in the original community. So if you start taking dancing into fitness, suddenly dancing is something that's based on repetitions and specific articulations of the pelvis and all this. And this seems to me like it's happened a lot to handstands as well. We take something that is practice-based and we make it workout-based. And it seems like there are a lot of practitioners or teachers or institutions out there that say you need 4 times 60 seconds of a wall to or belly to wall facing handstand. Do you think that speeds up a person's progression, or do you think that it kind of breaks their progression, that it halts it up?
I think there's a little bit there are definitely some things to take away from that. I think it's one thing that's fascinating coming from the circus where like you have brilliant, super strong athletes who can't tell you what frequency, volume, and intensity is at all. I have no idea. They're young, they're talented, they're in circus school, they're full of fire, and they just go and they get great, of course. But there is something to be said for the fact of structuring things a bit. Like when I started learning about these things, I kind of understood that, oh, hey, I can't do my 1 RM every day. That's not how biology works. I can't just steam train through that. I had to sort of understand how some of those principles work. But I think there is something like in general, on average, I would rather say higher frequency and less of these very long holds, less of this like tiring out workout kind of structure on it. But then again, like I would have it for example, a person who, let's say, was working handstands 5 days a week, which is a lot, but then maybe one of those sessions would be such a workout, because if you then take the time under tension over that entire week, it's already a lot. So let's say you would finish each session with 2 times 1 minute. You'd be very tired, and you'll be operating in a risk zone with the risks, which I'll talk about in a minute. But that's also something that to be taken into account, because if you're, and I think like especially for beginners and stuff, like you enter into some sort of program and then okay, you're going to get your 3 times 60 on the wall or whatever, and you're just going to go for this, and like fatigue accumulates and suddenly, ow, might not be the smartest thing.
Okay, so that's also one thing that can halter consistency, and it seems to be a very normal issue when it comes to handstands. It's wrist issues. Now, there are some people who say that, you know, they have a way of avoiding wrists being an issue at all, and that you need to do a lot of preparation for the wrists before you do a handstand. You have to do a very specific wrist strengthening and wrist mobility, wrist warm-up kind of routine. What are your thoughts on this? Because it's from my perspective, again, it's just one of the things that seem to stop a person's progress the most is these issues with the wrists.
Yeah, it's like the first thing I have to say about it is just like, it's like with anything, if you're putting yourself outside of the things that you're currently used to doing, and here we're talking about an angle in the wrist and an amount of pressure on that, like most people are not used to having on in their lives, but then you're operating in a risk zone. So if I would now scale back all my training to only standing on 2 arms for 10 years, I'd probably never have a wrist issue, because that load would be so much lower than everything I'm used to. But you will be operating in a risk zone when it comes to learning handstands, because also in the beginning, you won't be efficient. Like you won't be good at standing on your hands, which means that your weight will travel back and forth in your hand faster than if you're very experienced and can keep the weight more sort of centered in one place. So during that period of learning, and especially for people like learning 1-arm handstands, like you have so much load and the weight will be shifting all over your hand all the time. So like you will be in a zone where sort of it's risky. So the only thing I've used for sort of wrist injuries is like rice buckets, because like mainly because they just feel really good and like you get your forearm burning and whatnot. It's like just feels like a sort of nice low impact thing to do when I have issues going. And by the way, I do have a wrist issue right now, basically because I fell and I smashed it very hard. But these things might happen. I mean, worst wrist issues I've heard of was a guy falling in his bike, for example. He didn't train for half a year just because, like, I mean, this is a tiny area, so many blood vessels and like bones and all kinds of stuff going on in there. So if you get an injury in there, it seems, from my experience, a little bit like the wrist is got a little bit bro science, but I think the wrist, they complain very early, like unless like things don't need to be sort of broken, but like you get pain there faster than you get in your knee. But like it's sort of, when you have pain, it's just like, okay, I can't stand on my hands, so I just have to not do it. And I'd rather say like, yeah, stay off your hands for a while rather than sort of rehabbing him then to that. Okay, I'm just gonna warm up with 45 sets of, and then try anyway. Not a good idea.
All right. Well, would you like to share with us your your secret method towards the handstand? How to speed up one's progression so you don't have to spend time on practicing handstands even?
Yes. So I could start just by explaining sort of the idea that I figured out that sort of made sense with the way I practice handstands. One thing that I'll be coming back to in the second session is how gymnastics and hand balancing handstands are very different in both in their purpose and in how they function. But what I found that is sort of the most important in terms of learning it efficiently is understanding that a handstand happens from the bottom of your body upwards rather than what the goal is to get elbow over wrist, shoulder over elbow, sternum over shoulder, hip over sternum. That is what matters. Where your legs are is not as relevant. So what people have a tendency to do, if these now are my legs, these two fingers, is that they throw both legs up. So they try to just catch with the legs together position immediately. Go 1, 2. And this is not necessarily as efficient when you're trying to enter the handstand. So one exercise that I'm going to show here now, this thing here is just more of a principle of how the handstand functions in terms of control. So I'll be sitting here. My wrists will be about.
Quick interjection, John. Can you turn the camera to the right so that Mikhail is centered?
Yes, of course, sir. There we go.
So what I'm doing here is that I'm going to be sitting. My toes are flat on the ground. My hands are facing forwards, more or less shoulder width. It's not that important exactly where they are. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to articulate my shoulder blades, pressing into the ground. I'm going to round my chest so that my sternum starts moving over the shoulder as I press into the ground like so. And I go up to here. And I come back down. So what I'm doing here essentially is that I'm starting to move my pelvis over my hands by pressing down into the ground. And that is the first principle I actually work with when it comes to learning handstand. It sounds very dumb. Push into the ground. And the reason I say so is because if we're constantly thinking about that downwards pressure is what leads us upwards, then if I'm now doing this, and if I take exactly the same idea and I go to handstand like this, I push into very little, I'm in handstand already, and then I gather. So what is happening here is that if you compare, now of course I exaggerate this very slow way up, but if I compare that to yet another exaggerated thing, where I sort of throw my legs up, then I'm working with a lot of randomness. I'm just trying to throw exactly enough energy to end up somehow in this correct position. While if I'm rather thinking about the pressure into the ground here, the first thing I'll be doing is I'll be pushing through here. So I'll be straightening my arm. I'll be activating my upper trapezius, which will be pushing my torso away from the floor. And I don't need that energy to actually go up towards the handstand position, which ends up here. So this is the kind of principle that people's shoulder structures will be varying very much on that, and that's also something we'll talk about in the second webinar. But this principle applies on absolutely everything there is. As long as the vector of the force focuses downwards, we can also, as the hand hits the floor, we're being able to feel how that force travels through the body, rather than you just plant the hands on the ground and then you just throw all the energy up there. So it's the same thing for presses to handstand. It's the same thing for learning virtually anything that has to be doing with handstand. That's sort of the commitment of the energy is downwards. And every time I talk about this, I kind of feel stupid. It sort of makes sense that, of course, you push down. But what I very often see is just like I said with the kick up to handstand, it's just that they sort of just put the hands on the ground, like that. There's no commitment through here. There's no active pressure into the ground, which creates that kind of control rather than this, which is random and where I will need to use a lot more force to get there. Again, I'm cutting away the random variables so that I'm ending up with something that is more consistent over time. So the first exercise that I want you to try, and this is an interesting one. It's exactly what I just did, but this is the type of exercise that will tell you a lot about your shoulders. So if you see me do this now, I'll be pushing here, rounding again here. I'll be lifting up to my toes, look straight down into the ground and activate the trapezius. You will see that my shoulders stay more or less in the same place as I go up and as I come down. They don't have to lean a lot. They don't have to do very much, because if you see here, this is my shoulders. They're very flexible and they get this alignment here very, very easily for my body. So it means I won't have to lean forwards. And my toes can be rather close to my hands here. And what is interesting here, if you feel that you have to lean more forwards, this is a very classical sign of that the shoulders can perhaps only get to about this angle, which means that the handstand will have to open a little bit more like this to be able to get the arms vertical to the ground. So it's it's not necessarily like a diagnostic exercise, but it will show you where your shoulders are in relation to your handstand, because there are more things going into it than only just being mobile enough. There's also strength and things being important in this. So this exercise is just simply to get the understanding of that pressure downwards. And again, if I apply the same principle to something more advanced, they will press the handstand. Same thing. So this is just an exaggeration of exactly the same principle.
So a common mistake in handstands and in general, or specifically in this exercise, would be to allow the shoulders to travel forward a lot in front of the hands.
Yes, to a degree, but for some people they might have to, just because of the shoulders can't express that rolling motion just around this one pivot point. They'll have to compensate a little bit by going forwards, which is fair enough. My perspective is a little bit like this. Some people, and I've seen some approaches that are like, you have to get your shoulders perfect first and then train your handstand. I'm definitely not the guy who did that, considering what I talked about before, the breakdancing background. I did not have shoulders like that. I couldn't just put my shoulders and get this kind of thing. I was working here, so it was totally different. But I'd rather want you to get into handstand, learn the control, sense how it is, and work on the alignment things parallel to it, rather than treating it as if you just need to have this perfect alignment before you do any handstands. Because then if handstands is what you're going to want to do, then you're wasting your time, because you're not on your hands. You just spend an enormous amount of time stretching, and doing all kinds of drills. But you need to be in handstand, expressing that flexibility, expressing and understanding the balance as well, or else you have to learn it afterwards, and it's not going to be easier just because you have flexible shoulders.
So when we're practicing this movement, what would you say that we should feel when we're doing it? How can we identify whether or not we're actually getting what we want from the exercise?
Good question. And here's where we get a little bit more into like, sort of, if we talk about wrists and stuff, I think the number one thing that keeps, at least my wrists, now it's kind of stupid to say it now that I'm injured in this wrist, but what in general on average keeps my wrists healthy, I think, is that I'm able to keep my weight rather low in the hand. I don't have to be over on my fingers, totally crushing the ground with the shoulder very far in front of the hand. It can be rather centered. And that is what we're looking for when I'm doing this exercise. You want to feel that you're putting pressure somewhere in the middle of your hand, not too far back, not too far front, and that the weight stays there as you're moving up in this exercise. As you come to the top, it's really important that you try to activate your upper trapezius so that you simply elevate the shoulder. So that elevation happens. Now I'm not elevating. Now I'm elevating. Not elevating, elevating. So that elevation itself also helps you to get a few more degrees of flexion, and you will be pulling the sternum backwards rather than staying here and moving the shoulder front. So this exercise, as a principle, it doesn't do much for like the entire practice, but the next thing that I'm going to show you is very useful for this. There is this tendency that I very often see that when people want to learn handstands, they're like, you have to learn wall handstands first. And I agree on that. It's good to get some confidence, get some strength, understand your body a little bit upside down before you go for the full freestanding thing. But I've been trying to find a way to transition that stage of getting to the freestanding handstand, because it's such a big deal, such a big step to be able to go to. So what I use is something I just call it the half kick up to handstand, where you're not aiming to stand on your hands. You're aiming to learn the precision work of getting from a standing on your feet position into a standing on your hands position, coming down and being safe. So right now, there is a thing here and there's stairs here, so I need to be absolutely sure that I won't be falling over this way, which means that when I'm doing this kick up, I'm not committing to going even fully up. I'm going a little, like I'm going as close to a handstand position as possible while staying on the sort of inside of the handstand, which means I'll fall back this way. So it works like this. I don't start overhead. There's no point. Like it works for tumbling because you have to reach very far. I'm not going to tumble. I'm just going to put my hands there, right down there. So I don't have any, there's no reason for my arms to come from overhead.
Looks cool though. Looks very fancy though.
Looks fancy, but it's also very useless. And my lever is longer. So while here, I can just sneak my hands down here. So I'm thinking that there is a line from the heel that goes through my hip and into my shoulder. So it just acts as a pivot point like that, my hips. So I'm just moving like that. And that already takes me 90 degrees. So I'm half the way there already. I place my hands close to this foot and I push into the ground. Same exercise, same movement from here. Push into the ground, come down. I land softly with the hands, I land softly with the feet. So the thing with this exercise is that it can look like this. And you can practice, you can get used to, okay, I can go there, I feel safe enough, okay, I push a bit more, I go there, feel safe enough, so forth, so that you get an enormous amount of practice on an early stage, because you can practice this as you're practicing your wall handstand. As you're preparing the physical attributes to be able to balance, to be able to keep yourself up, you can also do this because it costs very little energy and it'll give you a lot of that precision, which, to be fair, I mean, to get a 10 out of 10 handstand kick up, I guess you need to do 4,000 or 5,000, maybe more amount of repetitions. So this is what I usually say, that just get on it early. And like I was teaching this older lady, she was like, she wasn't so strong in her arms. She was literally working like this. She put her hands on the floor already and just did that. Just to get a little bit of that feeling. Because yeah, slowly but surely, you're also doing preparatory work on the wall and other things that will make it so that you're getting your body ready to do the thing. But this is very, very, very necessary if you're going to get a consistent handstand. So to summarize, hands close to the feet, hip as a pivot point, so the leg moves up, upper body moves down. Pressure from the upper trapezius elevating the shoulder as the hands reach the floor. Push, come down. And I do not gather my legs. That comes later.
Cool. So that's like when a lot of people practice these kind of kick-ups, it's usually you have fails and successes. but that doesn't seem to be the point right now. It's
not so.
No, it's just more about actually spending time kicking up.
Exactly. You just separate those two because they're both huge components and they're kind of complicated on their own. And then you need to put them together, but yeah, just separate one from the other. Because the actual being upside down thing, standing on your hands, you can do by the wall and so forth. And then slowly but surely you have these two components, you're starting to get comfortable with them, then you start putting them together. So this is just plain and simple that position work. And what's so nice is that you can easily do 50 of these as kind of warm up to a workout and still didn't spend any energy. Because it's light on the hands, it's light on the feet, and you're just practicing, okay, I went 70%, I went 75, okay, 76, and so forth until you get comfortable with this range from standing on your feet to getting into sort of a balanced position. So the next thing I'm going to speak about is preparation for actually being on your hands. And there are two things to consider. It's the alignment and it's the balance. And a lot of people have a tendency to just over-focus on the alignment. And this is coming from a professional hand balancer who obsesses a lot about alignment. But then again, I am a professional hand balancer who need to be able to stay up for minutes. I need to be able to sort of present this in the way that is sort of under the consensus of how it's supposed to look in the circus and it's supposed to be beautiful and blah, 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 all these things. So obviously my technique needs to be very refined and very sharp. However, someone who just wants to learn to stand with two arms, like especially with the internet now, I see so many just people being so strict on the forum for no reason. Like, oh yeah, this handstand is a bit like this, is a bit like that, it's wrong. No, it's a handstand. Like, learn the handstand, but then refine it, rather than beating yourself up for it not being picture perfect in the beginning. On top of that, people's bodies are also different. So expecting my handstand to be the same as John's handstand or anyone else's is futile and pointless. So, however, learning the alignment of the handstand in an efficient way is definitely good if you want to take it further from just standing on two arms. If you want to do a press to handstand, then it's very important to get in the line handstand and so forth. But just to speak a little bit about it, like if I'm standing like this, I have very, like I said, very flexible shoulders. They move into here very easily and they carry my weight here very easily. But what you're essentially trying to go for is not moving your thoracic spine as you're moving your shoulder. So for me, when I flex my shoulder and elevate it, it ends up there. There's no movement of my sternum. But if this was the maximal range of my flexion, then I would have to do a bit of that to be able to get my hands into a perpendicular positioning so that I could more or less efficiently stand on the ground. So you need to find out where your body is. Here again, like one of the cues, one of the things that sort of always work in exploration, or like I'm saying that as sort of take it with a little bit of a grain of salt, but from what I've found, one of the few cues I found that sort of always works for getting the alignment to improve it is, again, working from your upper trapezius. So we're talking simply elevation of the shoulders. So you're pressing through here so that you're getting those activated, because two things you're doing, you're getting another big muscle that elevates your shoulder to get into the equation. And the key thing that happens when people fall from a handstand is that the shoulder drops. If the shoulder up here, then it can drop quite a lot further before it starts angling the torso to arm connection than if I'm starting down here. Here I'm already down. Up here I have much further to go before I sort of fall, or before my weight will very easily shift outside of my hand. So if I just demonstrate, I will do a handstand here. I will now sink my shoulders, no trapezius, and then I'm pressing into the trapezius here. So I'm able to straighten up much more. So going from here, using those muscles, on this door, because that's what we have. Should we turn the camera a bit, or is it?
We can turn it a bit.
Okay, yeah.
Mikhail, can you go over the last 20 seconds of what you said? It froze for everybody.
Oh, it froze. Okay. What did I say? I probably said something about trapezius. Trapezius. Trapezius is the boss, basically. It's very interesting because it's the sort of #1 muscle that dictates most of hand balancing, from even up to the very advanced things. Again, the stuff that works on the very simple things and keeps working on the advanced stuff is literally working from up here. So you're elevating shoulders up here. Some people are talking about covering your ears and it has to be tight on there. No, it doesn't. I don't cover my ears. I'm good at handstands. So it's a cue that can work, but it's not necessary. They don't need to be glued to the side of your head. But if you push up, you have further height to fall from before your weight starts moving outside of your hand, to just keep it on sort of the simplest level of explanation possible for that. So an exercise on the wall. I will have to modify this slightly because of the door frame up here, but the principle will remain the same.
Wait, before you begin, Mikhail, John, your microphone, can you position it towards Mikhail's face?
Yes, I can.
Better now. That's probably good enough. So I'm going to do a stomach to wall handstand.
John, your video.
What the? No!
Camera problems?
Camera problems.
Okay. There we go.
There we go.
So if you angle it down a little bit, yeah, nice. So what I'm going to do now, there is a door frame up there, so I won't be able to be fully tight with my feet against the wall. I'm going to do a stomach to wall handstand, but I'm going to do something slightly different, cue-wise with it, in terms of working on my alignment. Because there is one very misunderstood thing that when it comes to alignment, and that is where the shoulder has to be in relation to the hands. The shoulder can't be behind the hand, then I'm going to fall. So I see tons and tons and tons of people who work stomach to wall handstand, and then they just literally shove their chests to the wall. So this is where the arm to chest connection is, but I cannot be in balance here because here, my hand is behind my shoulder. Here, I can be balanced because here's where my chest is, and here's where my center of mass lies. Then out here, this is not balanceable. And that is why if you're balancing your stomach to wall handstand by just trying to squish everything as close to the wall as possible, you're not doing yourself a favor. You're literally hanging on the wall. So what you need to do instead, I'll be going reasonably close to the wall here. Now my shoulders are behind my wrists, as I talked about. My chest is touching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make my chest not touch the wall and let my shoulders go slightly forward so they go over my hands. Now I'm doing a balanced handstand. Now I'm on the wall, my chest is there. Now I'm removing the shoulders again and the chest. This movement is extremely small and it might be difficult to see on the camera, but the idea here is simply that I am moving this part of my body from the wall here. That makes so that this point is straight underneath that. And lo and behold, what was I actually doing here? I was doing the opposite of what everyone thinks they have to do in handstand. Open your shoulders, close your shoulders. That's what I'm doing here. I'm trying to actually bring my chest in here, which makes so that my shoulder is over this point in my hand, rather than being behind. If I would be handstanding in this position, my butt would have to hang over to compensate for the fact that my chest is out here. So this is like a principle that can't be fully expressed unless your shoulders are quite flexible, but it is worth working on for understanding where you're actually controlling the handstand from. Because what I'm doing is that instead of thinking elevation, protraction, whatnot of my scapula, I think two things. I'm on the wall, my chest is touching. I make my chest not touch. It's very intuitive and it's very effective, because when you're in handstand in the beginning, you don't have, your body map isn't developed enough to know exactly what all these parts are, but you can very easily feel, okay, my chest is touching the wall. Okay, I'm going to just not make it touch. So it's a way to sort of bypass intellectualizing it too much what you're going to do. You can just feel the tactile feedback. Well, now my chest is on the wall and I'm pushing my trapezius. Okay, I'm going to remove it. And that makes you close this angle here, which will be able to bring that actual stacked handstand, which does not come from opening your shoulders way too much. So this exercise is really good for starting to understand a little bit about the alignment and actually using your stomach to wall handstand in a way where you will be moving from leaning on the wall to actually getting free off the wall. The next one I'm going to go through is a balance exercise, or it's a preparation for a balance exercise. Because one of the number one limitations for the actual balance is forearm strength. And I've seen very many different ways of doing that. And I was actually having a discussion here the other day with a guy who, he said to me, yeah, but isn't these ones here like the best type of like you will do it in a push-up position to build a forearm strength? And I told him, and I don't think I can actually do that in a push-up position because I never practiced it. But again, I'm pretty good at handstands, so it's not the same thing. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to emulate now with the exercise I'm going to do, trying to emulate the type of push we need with the fingers when we're balancing on our hands. So here again, we're removing the actual balance from the equation and we're just working, isolating the forearm for strength. So it looks like this. I will be kicking up into a handstand with my back against the wall now. The form here is not that relevant. What is relevant is that far away from the wall equals very, very hard. So don't start closer so that you can understand how much strength you will need. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kick up, lean my legs on the wall, so I'm off balance on the wall. Then I'm going to push only from the fingers until I fall. So it looks like this. It looks very simple. Handstand position, no movement in nowhere else in the body. Then fingers pushing, I fall down. I repeat, kick up and again, I'm here, stay, body is reasonably tight, push, and I fall. So this is a little bit different from doing what some people call a toe pull, for example, or a heel pull, maybe, sorry. Because I'm trying deliberately not to move from the chest, not to move from anywhere except doing this, and then building the strength in my forearm to be able to move my handstand from off balance, literally to off balance. Because I'm not trying to balance, I'm just trying to crank my fingers so much that I'm slowly but surely build up the strength in the forearm to be able to have enough force on the ground to actually balance and correct those sort of micro movements that will be happening.
So, quick question, Mikhail, question.
Yes.
So when we are gripping the floor upside down, so here I'm putting the pressure from my fingertips downward, and will the sensation feel like I'm pushing down into the wrist, or well, how?
The feeling, the best way I can describe it is as if you're crushing a ball. Like you literally try to just crush the ground, in the sense that if I'm doing this now, I just have my hands on the floor, I put my shoulder a bit in front, and now I just push on the ground. That's going to just move my shoulders backwards. Okay. It's as if I move that way with the wrist, but it happens more through this like gripping kind of motion. And there is an interesting issue with that. It makes people's hands do slightly different things. My hands grip so that they look, maybe we can move the camera so that you can just see my hand closely. So if you just film on my hands. Some people's, like my hands, they look like this when I grip. Then you have some people's that look like that instead. Then you have some people that look like this. And then you have some that look like that. And I have a friend of mine, she's a professional balancer. One of her hands is like this and the other is like that. and she does one arms on both hands. So for me, from what I've seen from all the different people that are really good at handstands, how your hand looks is irrelevant. All that matters is that you have a positioning with your hand that is intuitive and where you feel that you can apply good pressure to the ground as you're doing this. Yes, but that is about just like the way the hands move. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's like just a drill to build up the grip strength. And this is one of the exercises that I like to do in sets and reps, because this you can do 3 times 10 sometimes just to get a little bit of volume in. Or you do one thing that I often say is just, well, you can do 10 of those in the morning, 10 in the evening, like a couple of days a week, and slowly but surely you'll start to actually have something to push with. Because if there's just not a surplus of power here, you won't be able to build sort of the coordinative effort with it either. So that is for the grip strength, isolating forearm, getting some work done with just pushing yourself down from the ground, moving nothing else than your fingers. Further away from the wall, much harder, so don't go too far away from the wall.
Group asks, what's your advice when you have people unable to maintain the straight body position as they grip the floor? He says that they commonly see people try to do this, but rather than pivoting through the shoulder, as you're saying, they break at the pelvis and the hip instead. What's your advice?
One more time.
So what's your advice for people who break at the hip and pelvis instead of rotating from the shoulder?
What's the straight body position as they grip the floor? Like, it's not necessarily that big of a problem. I think it's like, because I mean the fingers are first and foremost, they're just like that, they are trying to catch you as you start to arch. So breaking at the hip will, if I understand it correctly, because breaking at the hip is something that happens when the weight goes the other way. So like when your weight moves over this way too far, where like it's about fingers, you have 2 choices. Either you arch, or you will have to walk forwards, or you will have to, or those are literally the two things that can happen, because too much weight moves that way. When you get too much weight moving this way, you have 3 options. You can pike at the hips, you can planche the shoulders, or you can bend the arms. I'll be speaking more about that in the second seminar. But I think that is more of an issue when your weight moves to the heel of the palm, I think. All right. You can go back here. Yeah.
All right. So just to summarize the exercises. First, we did the kind of like a pike press up kind of thing, but from the knees. That was basically to focus a bit more on getting to know your shoulder position as you're inverted, and also learning how to push through the shoulders.
Yeah, it's more of like it's easy, just scapular movement. It's very soft. That can be done by anyone, sort of. And this is also the type of exercise that could also be evolved into getting more weight on the hands, where you would literally put your legs up on a box and do more or less the same thing, where you would put more pressure to get more weight over the hands. But yeah, it is more for like sensing where in the hand you are, pushing through the shoulders, so that you're first just articulating the shoulder downwards, rolling around your shoulder, getting on top of your trapezius.
And the second exercise was a half kick up. So basically just focusing on how to enter into an inverted position.
Yes.
And when you're doing that, you mentioned 2 things that seemed important, or 3 things. Number 1, that you pivot at the hip, so you get your rear leg up as you reach down with your arms. That you place your hands fairly close to your supporting leg,
right? And
that you try to push from the floor as much as possible.
Yeah.
And the third exercise was belly to wall handstand. So you're facing the wall with your stomach, and from that position, you try to get your chest from the wall.
Right.
without trying to remove so much of the rest of the body.
Yeah, it's like it's also very important to say that like with that exercise, like the adjustments you're looking for are minute, and like it can be almost strange to feel in the beginning. So you just want to feel that, okay, your chest is touching. Like try to make a very small space. Like we're talking maybe take 2 centimeters is a lot. You're just trying to move that a little bit forwards, which will move then the shoulder more over the hand, as if I'm sitting here now and my chest is touching. I move it like so that angle actually comes straight underneath my sternum.
Cool. And the last exercise was to kick up towards the wall, so your back is facing the wall, and then you push your fingers into the floor to remove yourself from the wall.
Exactly.
And the idea there was not necessarily to get into a balanced position, but rather to develop strength and understand the strength that you can develop through your fingers.
Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, it's just like isolating that so that later on you put the things together and you use that to actually balance yourself. But if there just isn't enough there, it just can't happen.
So from what I hear with these exercises, because a lot of the other exercises that we get exposed to, they're very much focused on the body's relation to itself. So it's where the shoulder should be in relation to this, and where your hips should be in relation to this, and how you should point your feet in relation to your shin. These seem like, if not very technical or functional in the sense that you need to strengthen this, improve this, learn how to grade this position, they seem more practical. You're not focusing so much on the body's relationship to itself, but more the body's relationship to the space that you're moving the body.
Oh, interesting. I haven't thought of that perspective, but yes, there's definitely something true in that.
Yeah. Well, I teach the exact same exercises in my workshop, but it's cool to see that we share the same thought. Confirmation bias, yay!
Yay!
But cool. So when people are practicing this, you know, like we always need some sort of motivation when we're trying out different things. Should they focus when they're practicing these 4 exercises? Is the focus to that every single thing should lead them into a freestanding handstand? Is everything supposed to get into a 1-arm handstand or a straddle press? What should you think about your own progression and what you should use to motivate yourself? What should you look for in these exercises?
That's a good question. I think like they would have a little bit of different goals in that sense. I mean, the first one of the sitting going up into a pike position is like, once you're getting reasonably experienced with handstand, I mean, let's say you came to me and asked me for some handstand advice, I wouldn't have you do this because I know that your skill level is quite advanced. So, but it's a good one to start just understanding some of the concepts. This is about like applying the pressure downwards. The kick up exercise, for example, that I think is like one to look for. For that one, I want people to look for this like floaty sensation where like it's practically effortless. Like that is like it's kind of the polar opposite to the one with the finger pushing. Because the finger pushing, you want to feel that it's strenuous, so that you're literally, that's like the only one of these exercises that are like going to the gym. These ones you smash out and you get some forearm strength from it. But the other one, you want to feel like you did nothing. If you did nothing and you floated up there for a bit, then you did great. So there you're looking more for like an effortlessness thing. In the stomach to wall, you might be looking for finding this relationship with the chest and removing it from the wall, keeping it on top of your shoulders through the trapezius, and building some time so that you can build some unless, because it makes sense if you can't hold your body up for 15 seconds, it's going to be very hard to balance your body for 15 seconds. So in that exercise, I think there's definitely some merit to just building some reasonable time. I don't think there should be any like definitive time, which means this and this many sets of 60. 60 seconds is an arbitrary time limit. It's just because we happen to use this specific system that we think that this is so great. Like it happens to be a challenging and nice time unit as well. But like I would say, like building up to somewhere around 30 in the beginning is a nice one. Then you know, okay, I can get up there, I can stay there for a while, feels okay, you come down. And yeah, last one, fingers, that is just push and suffer.
So I've heard the words combined before, push and suffer.
I wonder.
Was it my birth? But cool. I like this exercise. So it's kind of like just an introduction to being upside down and understanding how your body moves upside down, more so than being here's how we prepare your body before it's upside down.
And one thing, notice I didn't do any single hollow or dish hold or whatnot. Doesn't matter.
No hollow body.
Like, and let me say it like this, that it come in the second seminar is just basically, it's great with some body tension, especially through legs and hips and stuff like that, and more so on higher levels. But I don't tense my abs on any single one-arm handstand or anything I ever do, because it's not necessary. And my rationale for that is, one, it seems to work because I never do it and neither do any of the other pro hand balancers I know. And two, if you stand on your legs and then you shift your weight to one leg and you stand on one leg, you don't think about you have to brace your abs because you have a big butt. There's a huge muscle and there's a solid bone structure down there that just keeps you up. So basically what I'm saying is you're like, when you're on a high level, basically your shoulder is like a butt. And that makes it so that when you're placed on top of here, like the movements, like people think that arching and sort of wobbliness comes from lack of tension in the midsection. Shift the camera. I'm just going to show a very, very, very simple principle that completely shows the opposite. I'm not going to do a handstand with the camera.
Camera, John, camera.
God damn it. Cheap Chinese technology. I'm sorry, Dad.
Are we all right?
All right, let's see. Sorry, guys. And no. There we go.
There we go.
Yay.
So now I'm going to do something as magnificent as standing on one leg. So now I'm going to shift nothing except I'm going to close my eyes. Look, nothing wobbles. Suddenly it wobbles. Nothing changed up here. All that changed was that I couldn't be as fast in my correction in my foot with eyes closed as I could when my eyes are open. So this is like basically how to demonstrate that like wobbliness in your handstand, it doesn't come from up here. It has no reason to wobble to do the practice or to can't do the efficient movements. Again, the same principle as I talked about before. The handstand happens from the bottom. It doesn't happen by flailing around these things up here. All right.
Niels has a question, and I think it'd actually be better if Niels asked it because I'm not sure how I can word that. So I will unmute Niels real quick. He can answer that, ask that question. So Niels, are you ready? Yes. All right. You have been unmuted.
I was wondering. So in the exercise where you pressed through the fingers to come back from the handstand against the wall, like in the beginning you mentioned the weight having to be like kind of centered in the palm of your hand, and I also like I've been messing around with hand balancing a little bit, and I've had the idea that it was better to, like, if you want to keep your balance here, press from the first knuckles and to like not rely on really like finger pressing. And I was wondering, is this just because this exercise is more for like beginners, so to speak, or can you also just try to push from the first knuckles back instead of from the fingers? Because I always thought the fingers were for when you go too far and you actually don't really want to use the fingers.
Definitely, it's just like the idea that like if you just like, because I've seen many people who like I put them in handstand and they're like reasonably comfortable there. And they're in handstand. I put them a little bit off balance, over balance, meaning over in the sort of fingertip direction. And I ask them to push as hard as they can, and then nothing happens. Like they just simply do not have enough force in the hand to be able to bring themselves from even a tiny bit of off balance and back into balance. it's for those people that I like to use this, so that like they can just literally just develop a little bit of power in the hand first. But over time, like the more experienced you get, the closer to the heel of the palm you can start to rest, which means that like there's a lot of complexities to that, and I'll be discussing that in the 2 other seminars. But like in general, you just need to have, like, it's kind of a funny thing.
Yeah.
You need to have that surplus before you can start not using it. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's true.
Perfect.
So like they often talk about in so many other, like when it comes to mobility and strength, they say, you know, that if you go over your body's capacity, then you will injure yourself. Well, if you go over your body's capacity when you perform, then you're not able to perform. So building that capacity and understanding how to apply the resources that you have in an effective manner, not just by building them, but learning how to apply them in the context and under the condition, is probably quite important.
Definitely.
All right. I think that's it for now.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mika, so much for joining us. I know you guys have plenty of more questions. We'll be answering those in the next webinar.
Yes, rock and roll.
Yeah. All right. Jonathan?
Thank you everyone for coming out to this event, historic OMU hand balancing. Everyone's going to be starting me upside down. Go ahead and practice. When you put this on social media, let's use the Project 5A for this to just practice that. So hashtag the Project 5A will be the official one for this. And if you have any questions or any kind of particular insight that you want to share those inside the group. And I think we can go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Enjoy your practice, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.